Good afternoon, everybody. We'll be starting the session 5, the specialty training. I'd like to invite Dr. Swati Chandak, Dr. Hada, Dr. Dinesh Garg, and Dr. A.K. Shukla, sir. Professor Amod Gupta sir is could not come for the keynote address. So we'll start with the first debate on no need to teach extracapsular cataract surgery and small incision cataract surgery to residents not performed in practice. The speaker, Dr. Devendra, and Dr. Punita, you can stand if they're in the other end.
Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity given to me to speak on this topic. I think I was specially selected to speak on this because as a practicing VR surgeon, I do not perform any of these surgeries, whether it's ECC, SICS or phaco. So I think I'm apt to speak about it. When we talk about extracapsular cataract surgery, it's a surgery that we know was devised in 1753 by Jacques Daviel. And really, we're talking about a surgery that has undergone some modifications, no doubt, but is essentially 250 years old. And that's one of the other pioneers of this kind of surgery. As a patient, I'm sure there's no debate which we would prefer in our eyes. And as a teacher, I think this is an important question we should pose ourselves. Would you rather have your students doing an outdated surgery superbly or an era-relevant surgery competently? As a student, I'm sure all students also ask themselves this question. Would you rather spend 3 years learning a surgery which you will never do, or in fact be embarrassed to admit having learned? So I think from both sides of the view, the answer is clear. No doubt phacoemulsification is more difficult than ECC and SICS, but a steep learning curve cannot be a reason not to teach it. And I personally feel that the sooner you jump onto that learning curve, the sooner you become a safe surgeon. However, the current situation is slightly different. Surgical training in cataract surgery generally begins with ECC, the student moves on to SICS and then to phaco. And so this student essentially starts learning phaco in second or probably even in the final year. Ironically, those students who are better at ECC and SICS get more phaco cases or start earlier. But what this sets up is a situation where the student gets very few phaco cases because he has very limited time left in his course and obviously a few number of cases. So we end up with students completing their post-graduation without the ability to confidently perform phaco. And now they are entering into a situation where they have to start learning phaco after residency, either on their own patients, which naturally is fraught with disasters in many cases, and or they require to do fellowship training in phacoemulsification. Coming from an institute, from a charitable trust where we have courses in phacoemulsification, I won't speak too much about how we benefit from it, but obviously it is a telling sign that many students around the country have to opt for fellowship training in phacoemulsification after completing residency in very reputable institutions. So the ideal situation, as has been discussed already, is there should be a wet lab setup in a training institute. A surgical simulator, however expensive, if there is a single center in a city, a lot of medical colleges can opt to send their students there for training. Phaco should initially be started with steps, and it is possible to keep cost low by choosing the correct machine, a rigid lens, etc., and keep surgery safe by use of an anterior chamber maintainer, use of a scleral tunnel, and proper case selection. There are a lot of excuses my worthy opponent may speak about, like how ECCE teaches you how to suture, but I don't think it is ethically right to use a patient's eye for suture practice. You can always use the wet lab for this. Or how SICS teaches us how to prepare scleral tunnels, but why can't you do a phacoemulsification with a scleral tunnel? Or again, use the wet lab. So I think we need to move ahead with the times and let not a sense of history and how things have always been done be an impediment to progress. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Devendra. Now we like to hear from Dr. Punita how she disagree on this topic.
Honorable chairpersons and my dear friends, and I'm disagreeing with no need to teach extracapsular cataract extraction and small incision cataract surgery to residents, as it is not performed in the practice, because I feel that this should be necessarily taught to the residents. The phacoemulsification is desirable in private practice because the outpatient procedure can be performed under local anesthesia. Extremely small incision is required, speedy healing, less post-operative visits, and earlier rehabilitation with glasses. And femtosecond laser can perform continuous curvilinear capsular access and even faster recovery. But even in private practice, small incision and extracapsular cataract section have a role because many patients can't afford phaco. The beginners cannot afford costly phaco machines as well as the maintenance. Patients often arrive for surgery late when the nucleus is hard. Small incision cataract surgery is quicker and easier, and manual procedures teach the patient basics of phaco, as I'm going to speak, and also to operate with two hands before they'll have to operate with hand and foot coordination on the phaco machine. And even phaco may need conversion to the small incision cataract surgery, or ECCE. So indication of ECCE are hard cataract, poorly dilating pupil, posterior synechiae, doubtful zonal integrity, and novice surgeon, and the nucleus is extracted out from 10 to 12 millimeter incision. The small incision cataract surgery offers advantage of sutureless incision with less resultant astigmatism and less healing time, and it is a solution for the lack of phaco machine in the developing countries. And nucleus is extracted out of 6 millimeter incision, but phaco is about 6 times costlier, and small incision gives almost the similar visual results as phaco, done in various studies. Indication is hypermature, traumatic and hard cataract or novice surgeon. And the advantages are that they teach the basic steps which help to do the phaco to the students, like and other surgeries also, like bridle suture, conjunctival peritomy, cauterization of the conjunctival vessels, and distinction between the conjunctiva and Tenon's capsule. And less instruments are required, lesser OT setup, less amount of irrigating fluid, viscoelastics, and cheaper investment is required, and it's a quicker technique. Then they also teach how to recognize wrinkles on the posterior capsule, which is helpful in phaco also if we suspect a PCR. And there is less incidence of posterior capsule rupture, and endothelial loss is less and depends upon the experience of surgeon in SICS as per some studies. Whereas in phaco, it depends upon the density of the nucleus, which is uncontrollable. The ECC introduces anterior capsulotomy, can opener, by which later on CCC is learnt, and this surgery has minimal stress on zonules and nucleus is expressed out, and there is less incidence of dropped nucleus. Advantage of ECC is again suturing, as my earlier colleague have said, and also helps to teach the burring of the sutures. Even phaco may need suturing the incisions, and the concept of tightness of suture is, how to lessen the astigmatism is also taught by ECCE. Then small incision cataract surgery has moved the incision backwards towards the sclera, and triplanar incision concept, in which phaco, this concept is also used later on in phaco, that is external incision, sclerocorrentine internal incision is introduced in the small incision cataract surgery. It also helps to understand various types of frown, smile, and straight incisions. It's the first time it teaches CCC to the students. All the students learn on SSCS only, and helps to learn the concept of hydrodilation and hydrodissection. And difficulty in learning phaco is that there may be non-availability of machines in certain centers. There is dependent upon the technology, long learning curve, especially hand-foot coordination, and phaco 1 and phaco 2. More costly instrumentation like titanium needle is used, and skillful biomedical engineers are there to required to maintain the equipment, and requires vitreoretinal surgeon in case of nucleus drop, which incidence is higher in phaco. So the earlier SICS and ACC are stepping stone to learn the phaco, because the student gets well versed to use MBR, sclerocrescent knife, and keratome, and learn as the nucleus hardness is to be graded. They learn how to grade the nucleus hardness, and introduces the concept of hydrodissection and hydrodelineation. And in case of conversion also, then this is needed, so that though additional costs are associated with phaco and fewer post-operative visits are there and long-term savings are there, but to reach success in phaco, the student has necessity to tread the path of ECC and SICS. So I disagree that there is no need to teach ECC and SICS to residents, as it is not performed in the practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Punita. I think the chairperson can give their comments on the topic. Very important topic, and the message should be there.
So I agree with Dr. Punita's comment that learning should not be restricted, and we should follow the conventional teaching that initial period can be designed for the SICS or ECC training, because later also in your practice you're not sure whether you are going to get the FICO or not, and then if you have to convert, you have to know the other surgeries, the basic surgeries as well. So it's not like you will be embarrassed that why I learned this. So nothing, no learning gives embarrassment. I agree that you should, initial part of your residency should be dedicated to the SICS CCC training.
Yeah, I would also agree with Dr. Punita, because it's not that all cases we can do FICO. There are conditions where SICS gives as good results and is rather like especially hard cataracts and small pupils, non-dilating pupils and all. People who have skills of both FICO as well as SICS, and especially like when we got trained, we started with ICC, ECCs. Then your outlook is different when you encounter a complication. So that's how, like, I don't think we can just do away with the SICS in residency program, because I remember one of our residents once talking to the professor and saying, professor said you should do ECC in difficult cases, and he said but FICO, when we are trained on FICO, and this was, I am talking in United Kingdom, so when we are trained in FICO, then we are more apt to handle those complications. So ECC we are not trained to, or we are not doing. So I think residency program should include SICS and even ECC for that matter, because even a corneal trauma, a minor corneal trauma, they won't even know how to stitch if they don't learn, because we are not ultimately, even if we are in practice, and especially so in VR practice, like I am also a VR surgeon now, I do cataracts as well. So you need to, if you learn all these techniques, and if you have gone through all those phases, then your outlook for a complication would be definitely different, and how to handle that complication is important. Direct and clean FICO everybody will be able to do, but when a problem comes, that's where the real skill of a surgeon would come.
I think the take-home message will be that more the skills in your surgical bag, the more comfortable you are going to be. But I would definitely like to take a call from Dr. Devendra that there has to be a time to move on. 30 years back, sitting in these AIOS Golden Jubilee celebrations, we were debating whether to teach ICC any longer to our residents, or should we move on to the ECC and IOL. And look, 25 years, 30 years down the line, I doubt any of the training institution is teaching their residents intracapsular. So likewise, it is just a transition phase, depending upon the availability of the trainers and the manpowers and the equipment, that in the no distant future, you will find, though the FICO is going to be there, till such time there has to be a role of SICS and ECC. In a country like India, the Maruti and the Belgadi will always be on the road. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very important. If you see the practice pattern in Western countries and India, completely different, because in some district in India, there is a one cataract surgery to around 2.5 lakhs of population, where you have to do lot of cat. So this SICS and the ECC in the camp situation will be needed, and the burden has to be shared by all the trained person. So by that we end this topic. Now let us call next one on the topic of early surgery for residents. A must by Dr. Ravi and just optional next by Dr. Smita.
Good afternoon, Chairman Shah and delegates. My topic is RD surgery for residents. I go in favor of residents should do RD surgery. No financial interest to disclose. Residency training is an essential phase of metamorphosis in the life cycle of a medical student that marks the transformation of a theoretical generalist into a practically oriented specialist getting up to assume personal responsibility for patient care. Over the years, the process of surgical training has evolved from unstructured apprenticeship of unlimited duration in the distant past and a more organized Hallstadian pyramidal model in the 20th century to the current standardized rectangular model with defined timelines. However, the essential Hallstadian concept, see one, do one, teach one, continue to be ingrained in our residency training. The process of residency training is physically, emotionally, and intellectually demanding, and the essential requirement of an ideal residency program are a learning and working environment that fosters excellence in safety and quality of care and professionalism. Regarding training of retinal surgeries to residents, there are very few laboratory surgical models available to teach basic surgeries. However, no experimental laboratory model is available to train the residents in the field of buckling surgeries. In report by Sangong, it was concluded that at least 30 buckling surgeries needed to be performed to achieve a stable clinical result by retina expert. Therefore, enhancing basic procedure knowledge and necessary surgical training cannot be underestimated. At the end of residency, our aim should be to produce an ophthalmologist competent enough to detect potential vision-threatening emergencies such as retinal tears and detachments. Blindness due to retinal detachment can be avoided if diagnosed at appropriate time. Thus, we need proper exposure and good training in retina during ophthalmology residency to prepare them for facing future challenges. A phased program should be chalked out. In the first phase, the residents is given training in preparation of cases for operation, pre-medications, and regional anesthetics blocks. In the next phase, the residents assist the operating surgeons during the operations. And in the third phase, residents operates independently, assisted by a senior resident or faculty member. He or she is required to be proficient in some operations and shows familiarity with others. I shall quote famous quote by Benjamin Franklin, "Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. Involve me and I learn. Hence, involvement in surgery is must for residents to make them confident, future responsible ophthalmologists." Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi. Now I invite Dr. Samita to counteract what Dr. Ravi proposed.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. So I have to speak on retinal detachment surgery for residents, just optional. So let's just look at the current scenario right now. There are huge gaps in ophthalmic infrastructure and lack of subspecialty services. If we introspect, I don't know how many of us actually have the equipment in wherever we are coming from to do retina work, and how many of us are actually doing retina every day. There's poor availability of retina specialists and quality of PG training, poor emphasis on surgeries for residents. In our country, only cataract is emphasized, other subspecialties are not. There is high variation of exposure in the subspecialty of retina in residency training programs in India, and most of the retina residency programs are either from the apex institutes or from the private sector. Evolution of RD surgery. So RD surgery has really evolved from the days of scleral buckling, which was combined with retinopexy with cryotherapy. It's the oldest method of repair and is still having excellent results, as was just pointed out, in well-trained hands. Pars plana vitrectomy, which has come up now, requires intense training in the microscope handling as well as the vitrectomy machine handling. So this is what an equipment for RD surgery looks like, which has indirect ophthalmoscope, cryo, and the various buckles. And this is what a modern RD surgery, the equipment required. So the microscope with a fundus viewing system, laser machines, consumables like silicon, octane, perfluorocarbons, vitrectomy machine. And what we've been going through since morning, the training of residents in diagnostics, which is going to be a very time-consuming, intensive, needed program. The skills needed for RD surgery have been talked about enough already, but what is important is that as the teacher, we have to know that we are unaware of what the student is seeing. So we have, like for indirect ophthalmoscopy, we don't know. Skill transfer, again, various studies in India recently published, comparing the 20th century trained and the 21st century trained, that RD surgery percentages are on the decline for residency. If we talk about the requirements for a resident to learn RD surgery, the most important is a teacher trained in RD surgery, doing RD surgery regularly with a resident actually assisting, the equipment, and we must never forget the Miller's pyramid, which tells us the professional competence, how it's growing. So first of all, there has to be knowledge. Then why has to be thought of, knows how. Then it has to go on to performance. And for doing RD surgery, this is a very long-term improvement which has to go on. So I submit that only if the prerequisites of a trained teacher and equipment for diagnosis and surgery are fulfilled, can the resident evaluate, observe, assist, perform under supervision, and then do independently. And in very few institutes, we'll find these all there in the residency program in a current scenario. There is also, on the resident side, priority, motivation, low priority, less motivation, lack of attitude, and difficulty in diagnostics and operating the microscopes and the machines. So complications do happen, and remember, retinal surgery, the complications are all sight-threatening. So to conclude, till such time uniform availability of trained teacher and essential equipment can be ensured in all the training institutions, RD surgery for residents must remain optional. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samita, for substituting into all these evidence-based things. Now, I think thought can be shared by the chairpersons.
First of all, I was just thinking whether we are discussing scleral buccal versus vitrectomy, or we are discussing RD surgery as such. And the second thing is that how long is the residency? Are we just taking junior residents or junior residency as well as senior residency? Because as a junior resident, it may be optional, or a person may be good with diagnostics and medical retina. He should be able to diagnose a detachment and may be able to refer in time for a proper treatment. But when it comes to a senior residency, of course, you need to train them. And my thoughts when the talk started was between whether we should teach buccals or just straight away go with vitrectomy. Because in certain developed countries, of course, they have, especially the Royal College, they have their guidelines for PG training that these many cataracts the person should be able to, should have done, and he should have observed these many retina surgeries or assisted that many retina surgeries and all that. Of course, I think the junior residency training, it will remain optional only, because the infrastructure is variable, and of course that trained manpower again is variable in most of the teaching institutes. So retina training remains as a specialty training, which is I think the next topic, whether we will train specialties to the residents or not. So that's my view.
Thank you. That's a wonderful site. I think someone was, yes, please.
I'm a teacher in a second, third biggest city in Maharashtra, but the thing that I observed was that there is a vast difference in the level of teaching and the skill set as obtained. And it's a good point raised by you about where should we term residents and the senior residents. To my mind, if I agree with you that in case they develop a skill set to diagnose and be familiar with the basic steps of surgical steps of all these things, and then develop each specialty as they go into a senior residency would be a good scheme. Where we are lacking is we have not set our goals for each year. That is where we are lacking. So there is no fixed or written thing, document by which we should go. That the need is to do that.
Yeah, that's very, very important.
Thank you.
If I'm not mistaken, these things are very clearly spelled out and suggested in the ICO curriculum, which has been suggested for MCI for adoption by Dr. Grover almost 5 years back.
Yes.
Which has been adopted from the ICO format, and where again we find that the specialty training, more so the retinal surgical training, becomes part and parcel of the 4th year. That makes it after finishing your junior residency. So any specialty training, the persons must have exposure, we don't deny that, wherever the facilities are available, but then to learn them, probably a senior residency is a better time.
Only questions remains in my mind is that how many retina surgeons in the world had done their practice only by residency program? Fellowship is needed for them. That's because no some sort. But what is important again, when you see the scenario of entire country, this basic retinal surgery, we have to define retinal surgery, where as sir said, scleral blackening or vitrectomy or complicated vitreous surgery. So we have to define ourselves and what steps we have to keep, we have to address them.
Actually, I think it goes with all surgical specialties that 3 years residency may not be enough to train you for a full specialty, and if I am not wrong, there are MCH courses in VR surgery already started in India.
Everywhere it is 5 years.
So
it's there in PGI.
yeah, so it's a kind of a pyramidal where which side you want to go, which specialty you want to choose, and that may be reserved for a senior resident level, and depending upon where the infrastructure is available, either DNB or FNB or senior resident.
So the problem is that everywhere, I asked Pakistan, Sri Lanka, everywhere, it is 5 years after MBBS. It is we who have made it 3 years to create a cadre of specialist doctors who are accepted in the Gulf, as well as specialist doctors, but not consultants. The difference lies there. So those additional 2-3 years of residency for a chosen specialty is definitely a must in order to get trained in a particular specialty.
Yeah, I think it's there in all. Even in England, there was a 2 years SHO training, and then specialty training used to be 5 years, after which you will go for 1 year fellowship.
Yes.
So 3 years is not enough period to be a ophthalmologist as such, I would say.
So in India, what I think there is uniformity of postgraduate ophthalmology curriculum is because there are diploma courses, there are MS, there are DNB, there are fellowship also. But in Western countries and in other countries in Asia also, there are some structured PG 5 years or something like that. So during MBBS, if one to take ophthalmology, they are confused what to do, diploma, then DNB, or they should wait and try for MS. After MS, what to do? MCH is not very recognized here also. So there should be more uniformity in PG education, PG ophthalmology education in India.
Let me just correct. Fortunately, the diploma courses have been discontinued from last 2 years by the MCI. So there's no longer any enrollment for diploma in ophthalmology for last 2 years. That's it.
They are
That's a one step in the right direction.
But I think government is again saying that they should start to increase the number of specialties, specialists.
MS seats to increase, not the.
Okay.
So for
Thanks.
this debate, I think we all agree that 3-year residency period is not sufficient for specialty surgery, and they should at least expertise in retinal diagnostic. They should not miss an HST or subclinical RD rather than performing an RD surgery during 3-year residency period. So we can proceed to the next debate.
Yeah. Next topic is on FECO for residents, must versus optional. A must by Dr. Magdalene from Shri Shankar Dev Netralaya and just optional by Dr. Dhrubajyoti Sarkar.
Good afternoon. I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak on this topic. FECO emulsification, a must for residents. I have no financial interest. Why knowing FECO emulsification is a must for residents? Because it is a part of the basic teaching curriculum. As a postgraduate in ophthalmology, the resident is expected to know the basic cataract surgery, and that is FECO emulsification. And it is a basic skill one should acquire as an ophthalmologist because it is one of the most fundamental eye surgeries. And as far as job prospect is concerned, when after finishing your graduation, when you go for job interview, this is what a resident is asked. When he's job hunting, can you do FECO emulsification? How many FECO surgeries have you done? Are you comfortable doing FECO? These days, even during our DNB exams, these questions are asked by the examiner. And there are certain demerits of manual SICS over FECO emulsification. There is conjunctival congestion which persists for 5 to 7 days at the site of the conjunctival flap. Mild tenderness sometimes may present owing to the scleral incision. Postoperative hyphema may be noted sometimes. Surgical induced astigmatism is more as the incision in SICS is large, about 6 mm, as compared to FECO, which is only about 2.8 mm. Other demerits of FECO emulsification over manual SICS is it is a small incision size, and whereas in SICS it is 6 to 7 mm incision, in FECO it is 2.2 to 2.8 mm incision. And other merits include reduced surgically induced astigmatism and good unaided visual acuity. And as we already know that surgically induced astigmatism is proportional to the size of the incision. In a study conducted by George et al., they found that the mean surgical induced astigmatism was 1.17 diopters for the SICS group and 0.77 diopters for the FECO emulsification group, with a significant p-value of 0.001. Other merits of FECO over manual SICS include sutureless with good wound strength and integrity, and reduced endothelial cell loss as it is performed in the posterior chamber, and there is no prolapsing of the nucleus into the anterior chamber, and also reduced postoperative endophthalmitis. It has been found that use of injectable IOLs with small incision FECO emulsification reduce the risk of endophthalmitis. And also the patient's recovery time is reduced. The government in Chile has mandated FECO for cataract surgery in the state-run health system since 2004. And after doing FECO, patient can return to their normal life in a few days and recover their vision faster. And last but not the least, this can also be done under topical anesthesia. With this, I conclude that knowing FECO emulsification is a must for residents because that is the surgery which is in today's world, people should know as an ophthalmologist. When I was a student, it was ICC, intracapsular cataract extraction and extracapsular cataract extraction. Now it is phacoemulsification, and we will be blamed if we are not going to teach our students phacoemulsification, because once they go out and when people ask, do you know phaco, and if they say no, they will cut a very sorry figure, not only for themselves but also the institutions from which they are trained. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Magdalene. Dr. Dhrubajyoti is there to oppose the motion.
Actually, nothing to.
Okay,
nothing
okay, it's
to
optional.
Yeah,
Optional, yeah, it's so there is, I think, our esteemed chairperson can put a thought about this. I think there should not be any debate about
There
it.
should not be any
Yeah,
debate.
exactly. It should be taught is what
Yeah.
I also feel.
Yeah, there should be no reason that after doing your MS or MD ophthalmology, you
You
should
should not
seek
be.
for additional phaco training post MD or MS. So it is a must in today's
I
scenario.
don't think that should be a topic of debate.
Yes.
Yeah.
FACO is a must in today's era. Yeah.
Only thing, if you subclassify phaco, maybe a laser phaco, maybe on optional.
Yeah.
You don't have an institution where you have
Femto.
Yeah.
a laser phaco, okay? That can be an optional.
No,
Yes.
that is optional even for a practice, I
Yeah.
would say. But FACO training for a resident is a must.
Thank you.
Yeah, next we call specialty surgeries for residents, a must, Dr. Abhishek, and just optional, Dr. Satish. I think
Both are not.
both of them are not
No,
there.
yes, yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Just optional by Dr. Satish. Slides, please.
Go back.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My topic is specialty surgeries for resident. Now, I don't have the person who was supposed to be saying is a must, so I don't know what points I should be talking, but I will just give you my opinion. World Health Organization report, which came last October, said at least 2.2 billion people are with vision impairment, which including vision impairment, and that has been addressed. And at least 1 billion cases with visual impairment, which could have been prevented or have yet to be addressed, which includes unaddressed refractive error, glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy, unaddressed presbyopia. And when they looked at the regional comparison, they found that the people with vision impairment that could have been prevented or is yet to be addressed is mainly in the Southeast Asia, South Asia, and East Asia. And the recommendation is revolving around integrated, people-centered eye care in health systems to promote high-quality implementation, health system research, monitor trends and evaluate progress, raise awareness and engage and empower people and communities about eye care needs. Integrated people-centered eye care can help address significant eye care challenges that many countries, including India, face. A range of effective strategies are available to address the needs associated with eye conditions and vision impairment. These include health promotion, prevention, treatment, rehabilitation strategies, some of which are among the most feasible and cost-effective of all healthcare interventions to implement. Diabetes, you know, as global prevalence is 8.5% in 2014. India has one of the highest prevalence of diabetes in the world, with estimated 72.96 million in adult population. and which is predicted to be 79 million by 2030 and 109 million by 2035. This was the report published by the National Diabetes and Diabetic Retinopathy Survey. And according to this government survey, 11.8% prevalence of diabetes in India, with known diabetes 8%, new diabetes 3.8%, and diabetic retinopathy 16.9%. Sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy 3.6%. Blindness among the diabetes was 2.1% compared with 1.06% globally in 2015. Visual impairment was 13.7% compared with 1.06% globally in 15. And then come to the age-related macular degeneration, which is the leading cause of vision loss in those aged 60 years or older, and the morbidity is expected to rise with the increase in life expectancy. India has about 77 million people at or above the age of 60, representing a large group vulnerable to vision-related disorders, and the number is estimated to reach 180 million by 2026. So diabetes, retinopathy, age-related macular degeneration, glaucoma are on the steep rise in India, largely due to aging population, changing lifestyles, and enhanced life expectancy. This emerging scenario emphasized the need for established models providing high volume and high quality comprehensive eye care services. World Health Organization Global Action Plan emphasized providing comprehensive eye care using health system approach to achieve universal eye health coverage. And WHO defines universal eye health coverage as ensuring that all people have access to needed promotive, preventive, curative, and rehabilitative health services of sufficient quality to be effective, while also ensuring that people do not suffer financial hardship when paying for these services. WHO has proposed 6 building blocks for development and strengthening of comprehensive eye care, and well-trained ophthalmologists is one of them. Association of Community Ophthalmologists of India have reframed their agenda from Vision 2020 Right to Sight in 2000 to universal health care at the dawn of 2020. We have plenty of community care models like Sitapurai model, Narayan Nethralaya Chitrakoot model, Karnataka Internet Associated Diagnosis of Tele, ROP model, Arvind model, and now we have the Vision Center model, which provides the comprehensive eye care using the health system approach, and these are the institutes or the mental
Sir,
mental
can you
hospitals.
summarize it? Can you summarize it, sir?
Yeah. So, ophthalmologists of India can be the first specialty group to show that universal health care is possible, focusing on community ophthalmology service. Ophthalmologist can be the clinical lead in a multidisciplinary team in community ophthalmology service. There is a dire need to emphasize the residents' role as researchers and teachers throughout their residency. We need to encourage them to become leaders. This can be done if residency students have a great foundation of teaching and training. The potential of young ophthalmologists of India must be encouraged to take the leadership role. Residents must not be afraid to learn new technique and skills that can open opportunities for them to move on to leadership role. Artificial intelligence, deep learning is the future for early identification of diabetic retinopathy. This can revolutionize tele-screening in ophthalmology, especially where people do not have access to specialized health care. In view of the changing needs of the implementation of integrated people-centered eye care in health system, specialty surgeries for residents there should be just optional and not a must.
Thank you, sir. But here the specialty surgeries, actually, we have seen cataract surgery, we have seen RD surgery. The specialty surgery, the major surgeries, for example, glaucoma surgeries, the impact of the oculoplastic surgeries would have been much appropriate.
Some surgeries like DCR and tropion, these are some surgeries which comes under oculoplasty domain, but later in their practice they need to do them in their practice. So there are a few surgeries which should be trained to the 3-year residency period, but not all specialty surgery. It's not practical, as well as infrastructure is also not there. So I don't think we must agree that specialty surgeries can be trained in 3-year residency period to all residents. What are the other chairperson's comments?
What we essentially feel that looking at the burden of blindness, a glaucoma surgery, though it may be claimed to be a specialty surgery, should be a must for the junior residents. Wherever the facilities are available, looking at the load of the corneal blindness in our country, we should make an effort to teach our residents keratoplasty. In northern India, where the prevalence of trachoma contributing to the blindness is so huge, you simply can't say that I am not going to teach my resident the entropion surgery or the basic oculoplasty. Looking at the prevalence of pediatric blindness, when the almost 1 in 1,000 children is going blind because of squint and amblyopia, you can't say that I don't want to teach my resident a squint surgery. So I'll sum up by saying that the major causes of blindness and the surgical procedures to treat them should lie within the domain of a general ophthalmologist or a community ophthalmologist, or should not be labeled as a specialty surgical training.
Yeah, I agree with you, sir. But I think at the same time, even the uncorrected refractive errors are a cause of blindness. So, a holistic or a comprehensive approach at the training level is a must. So, I agree with you that entropion, ectropion, even pterygium and glaucoma surgeries, they should be taught to the residents. But again, my question still remains, whether you treat residency period as 3 years or 6 years.
Sir, but I believe that during that residency, apart from, giving more emphasis just on cataract, which all the residents usually look up to into their residency, if you don't give them that exposure, I mean, if they're not trained, at least if under assist, they are just assisting and they are getting exposed to the specialty trainings, it makes a lot of difference for them to take up that in future. So
no,
I
the
think
exposure to specialties is a must, I would say. But if you know how to use a microscope, you can learn each and every surgery down the line. It's not that first when we started with ICCs, when we shifted to doing surgery under microscope and started with ECC, we started doing phacos as well, we started doing retinas as well. So basic surgical training, basic concepts of surgery, and basic diagnostics like diabetic retinopathy for that matter. Diagnostic and fundamentals that should always be addressed. Sometimes we just keep looking at cataract and miss out a refractive error.
that is true.
To summarize, the glaucoma surgery, the penetrating keratoplasty, DCT, DCR, and all these small surgeries are must for the this resident program. Next we move to corneal trauma, foreign body, etc.
Yes.
So next is ROP screening for residents, must and optional. Dr. Jatindra.
Yeah, good afternoon. At the outset, I'm thankful for this opportunity. I'm going to talk about why ROP screening for residents is a must. As we all know that ROP is a vaso-proliferative retinopathy affecting preterm neonates, and in developing countries like India with variations in the standard of neonatal care, larger and more mature neonates are now at risk of developing sight-threatening ROP. In India, the incidence of ROP is increasing because of improved neonatal survival rate, and the incidence of ROP varies now between 24 to 47% in low birth weight neonates in different studies. And the risk factors that aggravate ROP are these, which all of us know: low birth weights, prematurity associated with septicemia, blood transfusion, multiple gestations, etc. These are the stages of ROP, and the countries with ROP screening guidelines are as shown in these diagrams. And unfortunately, there is different criteria for screening of ROP in various countries. USA, Canada, they have less than criteria of gestational age, less than 30 weeks, whereas compared to European countries which have different standards. Why the residents should be essentially trained in ROP screening is because the burden of the disease in India is huge. There is improved neonatal care leading to increased incidence of ROP, and ROP is a potentially blinding condition. Progression can be halted if we intervene early, and lack of trained ROP specialists at various levels, and paucity of resources at community level. So it makes sense to start teaching ROP the basics of ROP screening. The numbers are spirally rising, and India leads, unfortunately, all nations in the number of preterm neonates annually, with over 3.5 million neonates, a reducing infant mortality rate, and expanding base of neonatal intensive care units. In the rural areas also, the number of neonates requiring ROP screening has dramatically increased. And Kapoor et al. Published in 2014, and he found incidence of ROP computed in babies weighing less than 1800 gram, and the incidence among this group was 13.6%, and compared to the weight in 1500 to 1800 gram, the incidence was found to be around 11.5%. And these are the various screening modalities: binocular indirect ophthalmoscopy, RETCAM, and telemedicine. And we need to train our residents in all these modalities, particularly the first one, which is a basic thing. It's a gold standard for tool for diagnosing retinopathy of prematurity, and these are the various lenses used, particularly the 28 diopter. Indentation is required, but yes, we do have to monitor the child for apnea, bradycardia, tachycardia, and hypothermia. So we add to the armamentarium of the residents. The residents become well versed with the indentation during indirect ophthalmoscopy. They become accustomed to peripheral retinal examination, they become accustomed to neonatal retinal examination, and they also become accustomed to use of different lenses, different magnification, and different fields of view. So the training of residents for ROP should include didactic lectures, fundus examination in adults with indirect ophthalmoscopy with indentation, fundus examination, then sequentially neonates under the supervision of ROP specialists, and independent examination of the neonates with indirect ophthalmoscopy. RETCAM is another tool, and RETCAM 3 and RETCAM Shuttle have come into vogue. RETCAM 3 consists of integrated body with monitor, inbuilt keyboard, and whereas RETCAM Shuttle is more portable. And RETCAM thus offers a professional way to keep photographic records of ROP screening, which is required in the present scenario where the medico-legal cases are also increasing. Indirect ophthalmoscopy requires good skill, more expertise is needed, and it has. So with the increase in medico-legal cases, it is essential to document fundus images, which can be done by RETCAM. Smartphone-based retinal peripheral examination can also be done in the present scenario, and this is a MI RETCAM which has been invented by Ashish Sharma. It is not very expensive, and it was really successful in objectively documenting ROP in about close to 80% of the patients. Telemedicine imaging is getting more common, where at the peripheral center you can have the residents also, or the other people who can have these images from the RETCAM, and they can transmit it to the central area where the ROP specialist can really see these images and give the opinion. This is Karnataka government program, KIDROP, which has become very popular. So these are the globally accepted norms. Because of medico-legal issues, it is very important to screen ROP, and it makes sense to start teaching residents about this ROP screening procedure. We all are aware of the recent judicial judgments where ophthalmologists have been asked to pay as high amount as this as a compensation, and it's in a study done at AIIMS which was published, it was found not only the ophthalmic residents, even pediatric residents and nurses can be trained for ROP screening. So if pediatric residents and nurses can be trained for ROP screening, why can't our ophthalmic residents be trained? And they have found that the sensitivity and specificity is, as you see in the first figure on the right side, it is close to about 95%, which is not very much high compared to the pediatric resident. After training and nurses, you will find that is also very close to 88 to 90%. So ROP screening involves active participation also of the neonatologist, pediatrician and allied medical personnel. Giving adequate training, the general ophthalmology residents can then independently and reliably screen the susceptible neonate for stages of ROP that would enhance and improvise the visual outcomes in such baby. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhalla, and it was an excellent presentation. There is no doubt from the floor and the chairs that this is a must for everyone, every residence. Any comment from the chairman or any other?
I think, sir, there are two issues. Whether they should be trained, there's no doubt that they should be trained. But the other thing is whether they should do it. So I don't think the residents, they should perform ROP screening by indirect ophthalmoscopy. They should not be trained by performing it. They should be taught by RATCAM images that see how it looks like, but we can't, make them responsible to diagnose it, go to the NICU and do it this. I don't agree with that. It's there is a medical legal issue. You can't. Yes.
No, one thing is that screening, screening can be
supervised.
Supervised.
It can be supervised.
It is screening. Teaching protocol can be there.
No.
No.
My topic was screening.
Yeah. It is a screening.
It is a screening.
Topic is screening.
I think once they graduate,
screening, we can say, yes.
Once they graduate as ophthalmologists, they should be able to screen. It's just an extension of indirect ophthalmoscopy which we are doing.
Yeah.
So we can't expect RATCAM at every nook and corner of this country.
No, sir, my point was that ROP screening for resident must. So yes, it is must that they should be trained in that.
Yes.
But they should be. I don't think that we should subject the neonates.
No, thing is there should be two things. One is the screening, one is the treatment part, where laser comes, surgery comes, other options.
No,
comes.
we are talking
that
about
should be,
screening.
That should be a specialist.
Not
We are
laser.
not discussing treatment.
Yeah.
So we are. So the topic is screening. Screening should be must. It is a must. The treatment part has to be done by ROP specialist. So when ROP specialist is going to treat this patient, he is obviously going to confirm the findings. And secondly, the residents of today are the ophthalmologists of tomorrow. If you stop them from learning the screening modalities, how are they going to handle these ROP patients once they become full-fledged ophthalmologists? They are not going to remain residents all their life. It's only a temporary period. So I think it's a must for residents to learn the screening, and of course, under supervision, definitely better.
I have just one comment to offer what my co-chairperson was trying to stress. It is not essential. It is not something which a ophthalmologist is going to do. This is the current scenario in the country. The district ophthalmologist in a district looking after the SCNU in the district hospitals are not even trained in indirect ophthalmoscopy. And that is the crux of the issue in ROP screening in this country. What sir was highlighting, if you know indirect ophthalmoscopy, doing ROP screening is very easy. But looking at the magnitude of the problem in our country, RATCAM 2, RATCAM 3, RATCAM shuttle is not the answer.
It's
but make in India, new tech, retinal cameras, wide field cameras, which has been amply proven in kid drop study.
Yeah, in kid drop.
So my resident will be more well equipped if he knows how to interpret those images, if he knows how to do which children to refer, that the children need to be screened within first 30 days of life.
Yes.
If he knows indirect ophthalmoscopy, he can always do it. There is nothing very great about ROP screening. But actually asking them to perform ROP screening till such time they are certified is not fraught with danger because of medical legal issues.
We are just saying supervised training. Basically, till that time they are not certified ophthalmologists. And after they become ophthalmologists, they should be able to screen babies and pick up at least
cases should not be
threshold and pre-threshold cases where they can
when to refer.
refer.
When
Yes.
to refer.
I think we have
So
Dr.
we,
Dogra
yeah,
between us.
there's so we end the session. I thank all the chairpersons and all the audience for this session. Now I invite Dr. Meenakshi. She will be convener for the next session to conduct the session 6 on research training.
But there is another point.
Thank you.